Gotham is not a nice place. It's a decrepit, overbearing city that seems to draw in the lost, the crazy, and extremely dangerous. If Metropolis is America's shining city, the idealized vision people dream about, this is the worst case scenario, more of a nightmare than anything else. It's described aptly in the script to Tim Burton's Batman as if hell itself had erupted through the sidewalk. It may be a rundown gothic nightmare, but it's been utilized and reinvented dozens of times alongside the Caped Crusader himself. More than just another character, it's an organism subject to whatever its creators want it to be. In the words of the late Joel Schumacher,
she's just a force, and I thought Gotham City would be designed by a force.
An interesting byproduct that comes from existing for over half a century is that you get the chance to see this world change, but also not really evolve at the same time. It wasn't until Batman issue 4 did the city even get a name drop, and much later still did Frank Miller, back when he was actually sane and fully medicated, decide to use this stage as more than just a backdrop for The Dark Knight Returns. Which begs the question, why does this place keep us intrigued? How can an organism perpetuated by a never-ending cycle be a template for entertainment? Why do I keep coming back to Arkham City?
I am vengeance. I am the Knight. I am Batman.
I still remember the hype for this game back when it was coming out. As soon as that initial teaser dropped, I was anxiously sitting through every trailer and developer featurette. I was on the Arkham Videos channel looking up every Easter egg until that fated launch day of October 18th, 2011, and my dude, I didn't get to play it.
My disappointment is immeasurable.
Look, I was 12 years old, you were lucky to get more than 3 games a year, and we had already broken that rule for Gears of War 3 that season. But it was my birthday 4 months later, and that Friday afternoon in art class, I got a BBM notification from my dad saying he got the game. And unlike that time I was given Budokai free instead of Budokai Tenkaichi free, he got it right this time. He should be commended for that. It would be pretty hard to mix up this particular version of The Dark Knight on City's box art when compared to Asylum. See, I've always loved Batman from an early age, but if I was to pinpoint the exact moment I became a fan, it wasn't from a movie or an episode or even the few comics I had read. But instead, it was this one poster. Man, it takes a lot for an image to work its way into my neurodivergent brain, but these posters have been marinating in my head rent-free for over a decade. This was actually seen as quite a risk back then because they went against so much of the pre-established iconography, but instead, Rocksteady doubled down on this minimalist approach, employing this high contrast look which bathes its subject in a washed out look, and when you go that dark and monotone, color pops. Whether it's the reds, greens, or even blues, that one signifier tells so much by saying so little. From the broken glass serving as Penguin's new monocle to the blood spattered across the Dark Knight's face, it made it perfectly clear. This was gonna be different. To paraphrase myself from a previous video, I like simplicity. There's no need to clutter your piece with meaningless buzzwords when the imagery does all the work. Like, what the heck is this? You might as well put featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series. Like, seriously, go home, you're drunk. These posters also highlighted something else, and that was the care being put into the villains being portrayed here. One of the major joys of the Arkham series is the reverence and respect it has for Batman's rogues gallery. Each one of the major antagonists would get their own respective trailers and a visually distinct location that tied into their identity. A detriment of Batman having one of the best villain lineups of all time also results in a vast majority of them being underutilized or barely mentioned at all. But here, much like the prison itself, they're the attraction. And this had me thinking, how did Rocksteady do this? How did they make this map detailed, dense, and chaotic, but also clear, calculated, and a blast to navigate? Despite its broken down state, Arkham City's map is kind of perfect. And this is how it was done. So, probably the best place to start is with the functions of maps themselves. The most obvious answer is, well, they give directions, of course. They're designed to help people navigate from point A to B in an easy to understand layout. But to pull back a little bit more, maps are also emblematic of the culture as well as the historical context they were crafted in. You can see how much a fictional land like Westeros was morphed over time, how each of its regions are marked out by their respective houses in their own specific climate. What's more, they can also serve a narrative function alluding to future events, like how the Seven Kingdoms are all wrapped up in their own petty conflicts when the real existential threat is just beyond the wall in the north, visualized by the coal that will take over the nation unless something is done. Having that strong foundation is more than just effective world building, it gives the set dressing an actual sense of place and purpose. Much like everyone on my Twitter timeline, I've been playing a lot of Zelda recently. Tears of the Kingdom is huge and dense and should probably be a mess. But unlike so much of the fluff that's present in so many games of this type, I don't feel like my time is being wasted. The internal logic of this world and its layout consistently makes sense. Of course you're gonna get struck by lightning if you have metal equipped. Of course that wild horse needs to be soothed before you can ride it. And through those mechanics you can take in the sights and sounds better and more clearly than before when you were just focusing on progression. These are the moments that have stuck with me the most over my 20-hour playthrough. I haven't touched a single one of the central dungeons the story has asked of me yet because it's more about the journey rather than the destination. The problem with a vast majority of open world games is how they want to fill their sandbox with so much density and so much busy work that it doesn't feel like a real place. That lack of diversity makes it feel more like a collection of enemies and NPCs rather than an actual environment. It's why I actually prefer the Miles Morales game over the more open world 2018 Spider-Man, because while they essentially tell the same story, the smaller scale brings Harlem and its inhabitants more into focus. Those side quests actually feel like you're making a difference, not for the city, but for your neighborhood, as well as highlighting the more sinister threat of gentrification that Roxxon presents with its monolithic skyscraper. If this was just the city at large, it really wouldn't stand out as much, but being placed here, it feels invasive. It's taking away a part of you, and it feels wrong. Being more compact isn't only about making the world easier to navigate, the tighter geography allows central locations to have a better sense of importance. You can see this in the likes of Clocktown from Majora's Mask. Aside from being the literal center of Terminus that links each of its 4 respective regions, you return to this hub area multiple times over the course of 3 days. As you help the residents through their respective missions, you gradually see how each of its inhabitants deal with the impending apocalypse, which motivates you to work harder to break this time loop. You get invested in these narratives and you see each beat repeated multiple times, and you want to break that cycle, you want to see these guys be happy again. On the other end of that spectrum, you have the likes of Silent Hill, which intentionally messes with your sense of direction by having most doors broken or unattainable without the use of certain items. But it actually works in its favor as it feels like the town itself is out to hurt you. And after the hospital section where Maria dies, I'm putting it in inverted commas, dies, just when you think you have a grasp on things and it can't get worse, they take away the fog, at least you're accustomed to that, and leave something far worse. Nothing. The map becomes more than a journal and quest tracker, it becomes a key storytelling tool. There's a lot more I could pick from, like there's the time travel set piece from Titanfall 2, I already gushed about the ashtray maze from Control for its S-tier needle drop, but the last one I'm gonna mention is the use of interconnected geography from the original Dark Souls. Now, I'm about 12 years late to this party, but having just started this game for the first time, one thing that really stands out about Dark Souls' map... Oh wait! There is no map for you to consult. They looked at that convenience and said, "What the hell is this?" From Software forces you to memorize locations through monuments and shortcuts to save travel time. Something that gets lost in the later incarnations is that you can't actually teleport between bonfires immediately. You have to unlock that ability, so if you're stuck at Antor Londo, Guy Fieri ain't gonna take you to Blighttown. You have to get there yourself, which makes you more conscious of enemy placement and likewise the risk that these runs could cause you. Finding that blacksmith and that elevator back to Firelink Shrine was this amazing moment of connective tissue which made me feel like I could persevere. Having a solid sense of cartography goes a long way in making any fictional location feel organic. When it comes to Arkham Asylum, that island was the star of the show as much as it was the voices of Arlene Sorkin, Mark Hamill, and of course Kevin Conroy. I use Dark Souls as a jumping off point as both it and the Arkham series pull heavily from the Metroidvania genre to influence their world design. Now that is a mouthful of a title, but to break it down a little, Metroidvania pulls from both the Metroid and Castlevania series, which rejects the run-to-the-right design of many beat-em-ups and side-scrollers and instead presents a more complex layout which can be tackled in a more non-linear approach. It makes a deliberate choice of locking off different areas until the correct item or skill is acquired. By making your character weak at the start, it subconsciously makes the player more aware of shortcuts and significant locations which can be revisited later on. It's why I'm vibing with the Dead Space remake so much, because while it covers a lot of the same plot beats as the original, by having the Ishimura be one large overworld rather than separate levels, it feels far more immersive. Now, with all that preamble out of the way, Arkham City is able to take its predecessor's foundations and expand it out to a larger playground. One of the immediate ways it does this is not just by scaling up the size of its world, but crucially in one other area: verticality. Arkham Asylum is really simple when you pull it back. Almost frustratingly so. I mean, it's an isolated island that pulls from the non-racist parts of H.P. Lovecraft to define its eldritch look, right down to the gargoyles and the platforms being much more contained and closer to the ground. Even your initial glide into the first major area feels less like you're being given control, and instead being more of a mood setter. You're trapped here, and not allowed to go beyond what is shown. That's by no means a bad thing. I'd argue Asylum's atmosphere is its defining strength, and I do miss that particular brand of horror which a lot of contemporary stories with the characters seem to have left behind. But what's important is that the foundations were in place, they just needed some refinements. And that practice comes in the form of the AR training missions, which unlock the grapple boost. Much like Uncharted 4's grappling hook, it feels like such a natural extension of your arsenal that it's actually difficult to go back to the earlier titles. And in keeping with this extension, the buildings have grown in height and there's a lot more of them, and they're much closer together, making the traversal much more enticing. Those leaner buildings also show the change of influences that David Heggo, the game's art director, pulled from to make this rundown estate come together. If Asylum was Eldridge, City is more Orwellian, with a mix of Anton Furst's production design and a dash of Art Nouveau, right down to the blimp hovering in the sky to the propaganda posters littering the complex. It's nowhere close to our own world, but that fantastical layer of realism makes this clash of districts a joy to glide through. Following a rough wake-up from Hugo Strange and his militia, you're thrown into the streets where it's not just Penguin's goons waiting for you, but a mysterious hooded figure in the rooftops above. When replaying this game for this video, I really strive to go slower and soak in the details whenever possible, which becomes immediately apparent as soon as you've suited up on top of Ace Chemicals. This is Rocksteady giving you the keys to buy into their illusion of freedom. The story would have you go towards the courthouse to save Catwoman, which is intentional, but before reaching that destination, there's so much that could have been missed along the way. Remember the other prisoners who were sent in with you? Yeah, Jack Ryder clearly is not having the best time, and even more so than the political prisoners hiding in the alleyway trying to remain anonymous. That's two separate encounters that can be totally skipped, just like the chatter between thugs, which changes with the major beats of the story. What I love about this is how, despite the flow of time very much being dictated by the player, you can find so many details which can go entirely unnoticed. There was this moment during Bane's side quest where beside the Olympus nightclub, you can actually find a standoff between Joker and Penguin's thugs. It's set up like most general combat encounters, but in a hilarious turn of events, if you choose to engage with this group, you can actually see Penguin's thugs run away during the fight, and one of them straight up jumps off the bridge to escape, and he's just gone. Like, oh my god, it was hilarious. I've been playing this game for over 10 years and I never saw this before. We might come for the villains, but we stay for the henchmen. One of the never-ending delights of the Arkham games is the NPC chatter. Whether it's them doing push-ups or interrogating these guys, they never shut up, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. You can't go around any corner without seeing something new or eye-catching, whether it's the ice trail Mr. Freeze leaves after you've found his wife, maybe it's Scarecrow's number messages, and also the boat Easter eggs, which, my god, dude, I absolutely lost my 13-year-old mind when I came across this by accident. Like, it freaked me out, and I love it. Or maybe it's the little moments after the story's complete when, if you go to the steel mill, you can find these two twins who have reunited, and oh, it's so cute. Sorry, hold on, I got distracted there. Anyway, back to the courthouse. See, this is what this game does. It gives you the main direction to go for the story. There's so many other paths and you just want to go down all of them to see where they go. This serves as another example of what these games do so well, and of course, that being environmental storytelling. Solomon Wayne's courthouse serves as the home for the former district attorney Harvey Dent. Taking a building with a history and twisting it into a reflection of his own skewed morality, much like Calendar Man who sits in his own cell below all this, the statue and even the floorboards being split in half is not subtle, and that's why I love it. Penguin's museum carries this idea even further, showcasing his boastful anger against everyone who isn't him, by displaying them all in cabinets, belittling them to hide from his own inferiority complex, or even the underground city home to the League of Assassins. A reminder that for as much as Gotham might try to hide its own history, those crooked foundations will always be a part of it, right down to this little train set that is later used in the steel mill. Wonder Tower is the one building that can be seen from all parts of the city, for Hugo Strange to look down on all inmates, while the real antagonist is set below the complex. Like, oh my god, this game just keeps getting better the more time you spend with it. Having these buildings serve as extensions of these characters' personalities, egos, and desires makes every street, every room, and each little detail jump out. Like how the Riddler gets more and more desperate as you collect those damn trophies, or how Black Mask is just having the absolute worst time in this universe. Like, first his identity is stolen, and then his steel mill is taken. Twice! And that's not counting who we don't actually see, like those Scarecrow thugs who only appear during Protocol 10, or that cameo from Killer Croc which can be entirely skipped unless you go off the beaten path. It instills this real sense of curiosity for the world around you, and it is infectious. I love all these games individually and each have their respective strengths, but there's no other entry that has this much thought and care put into its construction more than this one. Who thinks about recording additional dialogue and staging encounters that most players will probably never see? Hell, I didn't even know about this one combat move until White Light's video. This is the real advantage that video games have compared to other mediums, because unlike films which are bound to a certain narrative constraint for pushing things along, by giving us the leash and taking in the world at our own pace, we can soak in more of the stories and art design that offers more than just set dressing. Every time I think I'll just boot up this game for a little while, I'll just play a quick section of it, I'm already on New Game Plus. As I said back at the beginning, this was the game that really solidified my love for these characters. As much as my formative experience with them will always belong to the Dark Knight trilogy, as well as the Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo run on the comics, this game is the perfect synthesis of all the different parts of Batman's mythology, pulled together into something which I never get tired of. When I pull back and look at some of my favorite games of all time, a running thread between them is how each one is tied to the era in which they came out, not in the trends they fell into or the feelings they gave me, although that is certainly a part of it, but instead from seeing a team create a foundation which would echo in countless ways across the following decade. Asylum and City are opposite yet interconnected organisms that share this rare grasp of pacing and construction which has never really been recaptured. It's the Budokai Free versus Tenkaichi Free effect all over again, but the difference is that these games aren't the exception to the rule anymore. A superhero game in 2023 comes with expectations, and suddenly, what was once genre-defining is commonplace, and the risk-taking gets left behind for convenience. Regardless of how big these sandboxes continue to get, they never fulfill that same feeling we had with the smaller sets. I don't like tearing down the worlds that fail or the games that try to overcompensate for their own shortcomings, but the more time that has passed, the more this hollow feeling has continued to grow. And I'm not the only one noticing this decline. You cannot polish a turd when the foundation is fundamentally flawed. You can't have perfection without compromise. If you want to make a great open world that feels lived in, don't look at its size. Don't even look at its shape. Look at the people who inhabit it, the places that give it purpose, and the degree of randomness that molds a map together. I keep coming back to Arkham City for the little moments that most would overlook, the small details hidden in broader strokes, because it feels crafted by hand. And even more than that, I think what ties this story and other Metroidvanias together is that shared sense of sadness. Hollow Nest will never be fixed. Isaac is left with his trauma. You can leave the world of Lordran much worse off than it already was, and despite everything that's happened, this is just another night in his endless crusade. But he still keeps going. At the end of it, I still find a sense of comfort and even a bit of hope. That's what a lot of the best Batman stories do. That's why this incarnation will never be forgotten, and it's why Arkham City is kinda perfect.